Eric, if you don't mind, when you do get to the American Promise section, could you introduce Caitlin first, and she'll kick it off.
Yep, no problem at all.
Permission?
I'll just do some opening thoughts, and then Caitlin, I'll kick it over to you. Good to
Sounds
see everyone.
perfect. Thank you.
Welcome everyone who's joining us. Thank you for being here. And just as a quick heads up, my fearless co-founder and our CEO, Todd Connor, is dealing with some food sickness this morning and traveling as well. So he may or may not be checking in, but welcome everyone. We will kick things off here in just a minute or two. I know we're most of us here are veterans, so I like to start promptly. Although 8 years in the Navy did not cure me of being habitually late, so I don't know if anyone else struggles with that. My long-suffering wife thought that her 8 years of being a military spouse would help cure this defect, but I still struggle with timeliness, if I'm being honest. And if you can put your state abbreviation or state name in the state name after your name, if you can change it, that's helpful just to see where everyone's checking in from. We will record this. Jameson's recording this as well, and then we'll share it out on our Slack channel. So, all right, I'll go ahead and kick things off. And can everyone hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being a big part of this movement and really building something that is going to change the trajectory of our country for better. So today we'll have a presentation from our friends and partners at American Promise. They're going to talk about the incredible work they're doing around campaign finance reform, which, as many of you might know, is one of the reform issues that polls the highest of anything in conversations across the country with people. They want campaign finance reform. A lot of places they want term limits, and sometimes that can be a beachhead to work toward some of the reforms that we're focused on down the road. But one thought for those of us, I am a person of faith. This is Holy Week, so I wanted to connect some dots here. The one time, well, maybe there were more times, but where Jesus got really upset during Holy Week was around money changers in the temple who were corrupting what he thought, the true religion or the purpose of the temple was meant to be. And so we see corruption in religion, we see corruption in politics. Those are my two favorite subjects, religion and politics. So I'm the guy that no one wants to invite to dinner. But our friends at American Promise are focused on getting dark money out of politics. And so today we have Caitlin Lacasse and Alan LaPolice. And Alan is one of our state leaders in Kansas who joined us early on. He's focused on Wisconsin and a few other states for American Promise. But the first time I met Caitlin, who is based out of Maine, was in the effort to get rid of Maine's closed primary elections. And Caitlin was leading that campaign in Maine we were a brand new organization. This was the spring of 2021. We hadn't even officially launched. And we got some veterans together in Maine. A classmate of mine from the Naval Academy who's serving in the Maine state legislature ended up going from not having any idea of really what open primaries was about to testifying in support of a bill to get rid of closed primaries. And Caitlin, we've been friends and partners in the reform movement ever since. And you all at American Promise are doing incredible work. You've built a really powerful cross-partisan movement, and we're grateful for everything you do and look forward to hearing more from you about your priorities this year and beyond.
Thank you so much, Eric. And I'm just going to speak quickly, though you stole most of what I was going to say, and talk about how, it was really wonderful getting to know you and what was then Veterans for Political Innovations back in 2021. And I just wanted to emphasize how important, what a difference that work made, being able, that we really leaned on in Maine, the talking points around how many veterans are unenrolled independent voters and what a difference that made. The committee who heard that piece of legislation is the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee. And to have veterans like you all there to testify, it really made the difference and moved the needle. We flipped members of that committee who had in past sessions had opposed it. And ultimately, not only did they support it, one of the House chair ended up reading our talking points from the floor of the House, talking about the importance of this to veterans. So it really does move the needle and make the difference. So I just wanted to share that before we get started, because I'm so grateful for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
And I know sometimes it's hard to see the difference that you're making. You might write a letter to the editor, or you might contact your legislature, but all of those things add up. And I can tell you from personal experience, it really does move the needle and makes a difference. So with that, to thank you all and to thank Eric for his leadership, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Alan, who will share a bit more about American Promise. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to hear our presentation on money and politics. I'll briefly touch on me. Eric and Todd have heard this more times than they care to speak about, but I am an Army veteran. I was in the infantry, 3rd ID. I fought in the largest tank battle in American warfare history, the Battle of Medina Ridge. There's some controversy about that, but Mike Gallagher thought he agreed with me. More importantly, my basis of information for, my reason for trying to cure this money in politics as a problem is that I ran for Congress in Kansas 3 times. I ran first as a Republican in the primary, did better than anybody expected. Then I ran as an independent because the party seemed to be shifting. And then at the request of a couple of Democratic governors, I ran in the Democratic primary, won that, and then ran in the general. And each and every time that I ran for Congress, I more and more learned the problem is it's systematic. It's the money in politics and the fact that candidates are beholden only to the largest donors. And I was told by the Speaker of the House, don't even talk about issues, don't even go to the voters. They are meaningless. This is literally the Speaker of the House telling me it's all about raising money. It's about making sure that you have more money than your opponent and then just hitting them with attack ads. And I didn't think that was the way it should be. So I got involved with American Promise a couple of years back. Jeff Clements founded it back in 2015, 2016. The goal of American Promise is to pass a constitutional amendment, and I'll explain the process for that and why that's essential. But let me share my screen real quick, and I'll give you a quick slide presentation. I'll go through it pretty quickly, just so that we can save a lot more time at the end for questions and answers, and Caitlin will be great for that section. Can everybody see my screen? Awesome. Yep. All right. So as I said, American Promise is working on money in politics. Our singular issue is a constitutional amendment that would allow state and federal legislatures the ability that they've always had since the founding of the Republic to set reasonable limits in terms of campaign finance. Let's see. The problem is that Americans live in a reality that isn't what they want. Policies are influenced by only the big donors, as I mentioned. The Speaker of the House said the only thing that matters are those biggest donors. Elections are swayed by big money. If anyone remembers the Princeton study that showed that the opinions and the political desires of the vast majority of voters have an absolutely zero difference in terms of policy. The only thing that actually changes policy is the wishes and the choices of the largest donors, and that's a real study. And that we feel that the public officials that we elect are representing only the interests of those biggest donors. But what we want is all policies to be influenced by the constituents, by the voters. We want an election that's fair and free and open to all. And we want elected officials who do listen to us and don't just go after the largest donors. However, since it started in 2010, but more so, it began back in the 1970s with a case called Buckley v. Valeo, where the Supreme Court inadvertently started to make this case that, well, it takes money to get messaging out in a political process. Therefore, money must be considered similar to free speech, which is protected by the First Amendment. Now, over the course of a couple of Supreme Court cases, that point got finer and finer, to the point where now no one questions the spending of money. So long as there's no coordination, they say, well, that's not quid pro quo, and consequently, you cannot regulate it because it's a First Amendment right. And we'll get to this later in this presentation, but the argument is that all spending of money, whether it's dark or transparent, is protected by the First Amendment. And I would say, is that the case for leaders of Russia? Is that the case for leaders within the Chinese Communist Party? Do they have the First Amendment right to spend money in United States elections? This chart shows the spending of money since 2008, $5 billion. That seems like a lot to spend on the political process. But back then, I guess that was reasonable. In 2016, they started to figure out how to use independent expenditures, which is a 527. It's a political action spending account where you can actually spend money on candidates so long as you don't actually coordinate with the candidate. And in 2020, they really figured it out. 14 billion. It was actually $14.5 billion in the midterm election of 2022. Notice the dark blue. That's just congressional spending. That doesn't even include presidential spending because there was no presidential election that year. This cycle, 2024, estimates are between 20 billion and up to 30 billion when you calculate in state and federal and presidential spending of money. And that is insane. It's just going to go up because there are no guardrails in place right now to do anything about the spending, specifically the independent expenditure spending. Now, I'll state real quick, the direct-to-candidate spending, so if you want to contribute to a candidate, there are still limits, and you still have to fill out a form, and you have to submit it when you do your donation, and it's subject to all kinds of limitations on who's your employer, who do you employ, how much can you give per election, per cycle, in what states. All of that is regulated because apparently money can be regulated sometimes, but in the spending of independent and super PAC, there is absolutely zero regulations whatsoever. This apparently is something that Americans are aware of because the influence of money in politics. So when they polled, 72% of Americans said that democracy was threatened. Of that 72, 86% said the greatest threat was money buying politics and buying policy. Now, there's another poll that just came out recently, just last month. Pew did a poll that said, what are the 3 biggest policy issues that Americans feel are important in 2024? This is the first time that money in politics, or the influence of money on candidates, became the 3rd most important issue. The other 2 issues, the number 1 issue is the economy because everybody votes their pocketbook, but the second is terrorism. Only 1% less said that the influence of politicians being bought up by big money was a great threat to democracy, and it was number 3 policy issue for Americans. Civic trust, they say that a government derives its authority from the consent of the governed. And right now, trust in government to do the right thing most of the time is at 16%, which is a terrible number. Todd and Eric and others always point out that I think incumbents in Congress have like a 93% return rate, despite the fact that Congress itself has a 16% trust. So there's a disconnect there. If we look back here in the 1960s and 70s, this is actually 77%. This is just at the end of the Kennedy administration. 77% of Americans trusted their government to do the right thing the majority of the time. And then after there was the Nixon Watergate scandal and a couple other things, there was a war that we couldn't win. The trust just continued to drop. We had a little peak here in 2001 after 9/11, and then that just went back down. So trust in government is not there, and it is a definite threat to democracy itself. It's important to know who's spending this money. As I said, the direct to candidate contributions, they haven't increased. The limits haven't increased that much, and there's still total accountability on those donations. However, with super PACs, with independent expenditures, and with 527s, some people can give as much as they want, and some people do. The fact is, only 1% of donors make up the 93% of super PAC and 527 spending. And that is a great threat, considering that means that that's who candidates listen to. This is a constitutional problem brought on by the Supreme Court's inadvertent decision to say that money is free speech. We're not going to try and argue that money's not free speech, but as I've mentioned, money can be regulated whenever there's a definite an interest by the government to limit the appearance of corruption. So when should the government step in and limit that corruption? Well, right now, no government, no legislative body has the ability to do anything about it. It's only through the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has to decide this. And I've read my Constitution, and the 10th Amendment's very clear. Those things that aren't in the Constitution, they go back to the states and the federal legislatures. They shouldn't be handled by the judiciary. So we're trying to help the Supreme Court. We're actually trying to put a finer point on these decisions and say, yes, the spending of money can be considered speech, and you can spend money, but the states have an interest, a sovereign right to limit that money when there's an appearance of corruption. And considering the spending, there's definitely corruption. So our solution is the 28th Amendment to the Constitution, which would allow limits on money in politics by state and federal legislatures within their respective jurisdictions. The 4R Freedom Amendment allows the citizens to place those limits on campaign spending via their legislators, and it puts power back in the hands of the American people, and every vote at that point should count. So we do classify this as an election integrity issue. Being a veteran myself, I classify this as a national security issue, especially when we've got foreign governments that are clearly spending money on ballot campaigns. People say it's a moonshot. They say we can't amend the Constitution because it's too big of a lift, but we've done it. We've done it 27 other times, or 17 plus the Bill of Rights. So the first one was the Bill of Rights back in the 1790s. There was the Civil War era amendments that happened. Then there was the suffrage movement back in the 20s. There was the Civil Rights era in the 60s. And we feel, based on this timeline, if you notice, there's about 60, 70 years between each one. We feel that it's time for another movement, another series of constitutional amendments. We'd like to think that the first one is going to be this money in politics, which is so supported by the vast majority of Americans. And it's also supported by the vast majority of elected officials. They're just afraid that they can't do anything about it. Some of the other ones that people talk about are balanced budget amendments and term limit amendments. We'd like to kick off this process with the money in politics amendment, the 4R Freedom Amendment. Achieving this is a heavy lift. It requires 2/3 of both chambers in Congress, and then it must be ratified by the states, 3/4 of the states. That's 38 states. The good news is we already have 22 that have said they will ratify, and we've got 4 more that are in the works. Wisconsin last month came so desperately close to passing this through the Senate with a supermajority. And it wasn't for lack of support, it was just a lack of time. Pennsylvania has 2 pieces of legislation right now that are pending. It was passed out of the Assembly, the lower chambers, State Government Committee, with a huge majority, and we're confident that when it goes to the floor, it will pass, making Pennsylvania the 23rd state to call for the amendment. The way that we do this is that it's very specifically, we're nonpartisan. We talk to people on both sides, including the independents. We have a state-based strategy where we go to the states first and we get them to say, yes, we will ratify once the amendment is passed. We use that support to leverage the members of Congress to say, hey, the people in your state, your constituents support this. And it does work. We can influence legislators on both sides of the aisle when they see their state moving on this. We do a lot of research and analysis. We mobilize our grassroots, we mobilize our grass tops, and then we have strong messaging to make sure that the legislators that have to decide on this, they know that this is the right decision. Let's see. That's sort of redundant, but then, like I said, we've got 22 states, 4 more in queue. We're confident that this 2024 is going to be a big year. We'd like to believe that we'll pass this through Congress by 2026, which is the semi-sesquicentennial of this country. I think that's the right word. And then we do believe that it will be short work to get ratification amongst the states. already 76.6% of Americans support the actual language that we are using. So this has the vast support of the majority of Americans. Very few things have this high of bipartisan support. There are very few questions or concerns that you can put on there where there's this much support. We've got a lot of broad-based support. So Jimmy Carter, I don't know if you're a fan of Jimmy Carter. I was born in the 70s, so I think Jimmy Carter is pretty cool. He is on our advisory board. He has given us his endorsement. The Carter Institute is backing us. Olympia Snowe, former Republican senator in Maine. These are some quotes from them. And I'll provide the slide deck to Eric later. So if anybody wants to take a look, they can. We've got Maureen Klein. This is corporate support. Pirelli Tires, everybody knows Pirelli Tires. They have a no influencing politics policy where they do not put money into politics, which is why Maureen Klein, the VP of Sustainability, she supports us and she provides all kinds of backing to our cause. Deborah Winger, actress from Steel Magnolias, I think. Great person. She's on our board as well. That's her quote. We've got support in the military community. Admiral William Owens, retired Navy admiral. He was in the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a CEO at Nortel. And then a friend of mine, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Lawrence Wilkerson was the Chief of Staff for Colin Powell back during around the 9/11 time when they were ramping up for war. Colonel Wilkerson provides a lot of insight because he has been in the room so many times. He sat with the Joint Chiefs. He was the Chief of Staff to Colin Powell. I mean, there's nobody with more information than that. And then this is from one of our own. This is Jeff Carson supporting the main ballot or question 2 effort. Now it's time to act. Like I said, I'll give you these slides, but I want to definitely make time for Q&A. So again, I'll put these in the chat in a moment, but right now, Pennsylvania has a legislative campaign. So just yesterday, we did a text banking, and it was the first time that American Promise has done something with texting that was so big. I think we were able to contact over 3,000 people via texts. It was an amazing effort, and it's peer-to-peer texting, so those volunteers got a chance to actually engage with the voters on the other end when they read the text, opted in, and then started questioning us. And that was a lot of fun. There's also, we have an advocacy tool that allows, if you send it out to any of your supporters or colleagues, friends, it allows with just one click, you can engage with the legislature in Pennsylvania and you can ask them to support the Florida Freedom Amendment. So these are some great resources that we have. We also have an important conference coming up. Once a year, we do our National Citizen Leadership Conference. We try to do that usually in DC, and then we follow it up with a lobby day. So that's going to be June 11th and June 12th. We would love to invite everybody on this call to come to that conference, and I'll talk to you more about opportunities that you can have should you join us. A big push this year with American Promise is candidate pledges, which means we go to any candidate from any party in any race, local, state, federal, and we get them to pledge. And this pledge is just like the term limits pledge. Everybody who's been a candidate knows the term limits pledge. Everybody gets it. They get the balanced budget pledge. This is the candidate pledge for money in politics. And it should be an easy ask because most candidates realize that they're facing an uphill battle fighting against an incumbent or someone who's much better funded. So the candidate pledge is a great place to get people on board. And then, like I said, American Promise, we're active in 4 or 5, looks like 6 states. If we don't win Pennsylvania this spring, then we're going to be back in Pennsylvania, but I'm pretty confident that we will. There's a QR code there if you want to read more about the actual amendment, the language, and find out. There's a great Q&A on there about why each word was chosen, what the amendment will do, what it won't do. One thing that it won't do, and I want to be clear on this, is it doesn't set limits. It doesn't actually determine what limits are, who can donate, where they can donate. What this does is this unties state and federal legislatures, and it says to them, you have the right to set those limits. This starts the conversation. This moves us forward, and it just restores back to what we had before all the money in politics started crushing the political process. So this is restorative. It returns it to the states and the federal legislature, and those limits are determined by elected officials, not by us. I think that's all I've got. So now,
Awesome.
let me move my screen back over here so I'm not looking all crazy.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Alan. And I was just going to make 2 comments and then we can open it up for a few questions. The two comments are around how this is connected with the reforms that Veterans for All Voters champion. Two things. One is the Alaska example. So the Alaska ballot measure, part of the Alaska ballot measure was campaign finance reform. And if you speak to people in Alaska, they say that is probably what got it over the 50% margin. Now, some states with ballot amendments, they have very strict single subject rules, and it's not possible to always do it. But if and when it is possible, that's something we have in our toolbox. The second point is that open primaries, and these two things go hand in hand in another way. I was talking with Alex and Jameson before the call. Money in politics, we've seen in recent primary elections, right, that in California, for example, Senator Schiff's race, there were accusations that a super PAC, dark money, if you ever hear the term IE is short for independent expenditure, super PAC spent over $10 million to handpick a weaker opponent for Congressman Schiff. That happens in closed primaries. That happens in semi-closed primaries. That happens in open primaries with top two. But guess where that is not possible? In the Alaska election model, you literally cannot spend enough money or figure out how to handpick your weakest opponents in a top four instant runoff general election. So this actually helps solve the problem. And our hope is we'll get people elected in Alaska who become champions for campaign finance reform. So those are just some comments from me. And I'm just curious what any other questions. Go ahead and raise your hand physically or virtually, and then we'll Mark Foss from Wisconsin. Go ahead, brother.
So I'm curious, months or I guess a couple of years ago, either you or Todd, when asked, said we're a single mission. Final five is our single sole mission. Are we expanding that mission, or is this just considered allies, but it's something we're not taking on because it goes away from that initial sole focus?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. So we, Veterans for All Voters, we're not necessarily expanding our mission, but being an old Navy person, right, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Sure.
And so wherever we can collaborate and get wins on the board for reforms, that's going to help all of us.
Right.
And the second point is in New York, there's a new organization, Unite New York, that's working toward Final Five, but they believe the best first step is to work on term limits and then maybe campaign finance reform. So when there's steps to get toward Final Five that include campaign finance reforms, or we're all about it. Caitlin, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, we have greatly enjoyed working with Veterans for All Voters, even if this isn't the top issue, and have so appreciated where members, I know you all have folks in the states where we said, in Maine this last year, we were running a ballot initiative that won with 86% support. That's the largest margin of victory in any initiative in the state. And several members of your team participated in ways that worked for them. I know some made phone calls or texted as part of our mobilization effort, and some wrote letters to the editor and op-ed. So I would just suggest that there are ways for you all to engage that is extremely helpful and does move the needle. So I just wanted to chime in with that.
Awesome. It looks like Amit from Michigan, going to B school at the University of Michigan. What question do you have for us?
Yeah. My question was, so I love the campaign finance additions you guys are talking about. Mine was about the term limits that you had mentioned. Like people talk about it, and I think it's popular anecdotally. But then I've also wondered about the concern that right now committee chairs in Congress are selected by seniority, and so a lot of the power is kind of distributed. That if you're putting term limits in place, it'll kind of shift power for committee chair selection to more to the party, and so that there's more of a centralization of power. Is that a concern, or is that something that's been considered, and how does that impact our pursuit?
If I can take a step. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say for Veterans for All Voters, again, we don't focus on term limits, and most reform organizations, if they support them, they recommend a long enough runway, 16 to 20 year limits. Missouri has 8-year term limits, and that's way too short. By the time state legislators can figure out where the bathrooms are, right, they're out, and so the lobbyists write all of our bills. So that's a main concern of it. And did someone else have a comment about term limits?
I was going to say, I should clarify too, American Promise, like I said, single issue. We don't work with term limits. However, we do present at the National Conference of State Legislators. And so the big discussion that they usually have at this conference of state legislators is those three. They talk about a balanced budget, and they talk about amending the Constitution. They talk about term limits, and that's great. You know, I like that. But we don't support those efforts. We support our money in politics. And I want to say, you're right. If you do term limits, then they haven't figured out where the bathroom is. They haven't gotten seniority. They don't know the process yet. And it ends up that the staffers or, political elites run the committees and they run the whole show. So I want to put a question on that and say, who really runs the show now? Because I know that in Congress, committee chairs are not assigned by seniority. You would think that they are. Committee assignments are given based on how much money you raise for the party. That's the only way to get onto a committee. And there are 3 tiers. And those tiers start at $250,000 per year. So you want a senior committee, you want like finance, you're going to be giving the party $2 million a year. You want to be the chair, you're the biggest money getter. You're the person that raises the most money to put into your party. That's how you get a committee chair or a subcommittee chair. It's not seniority. It used to be, but it's not. Now it's based on who can raise the most money to get the committees they want. And the committee chair is the person that actually brings in the most dollars.
Let's go to Professor Roger Herbert in North Carolina next.
Hey, thanks a lot. So Alan, I really appreciate your optimism. That's got me fired up. And I don't mean to sound like a cynic, but I think I'm gonna. That's a big haul to get 2/3 of House and Senate. When you think that everybody who's sitting there has been very successful in a system in which money is everything, and your comment in particular, you're suggesting that there's going to be enough grassroots push to get them to vote maybe against their own interests if their interests are purely staying in power. But I mean, your comment that the House Speaker, said, hey, don't listen to your voters. Listen, it's all about money. So that brings me back to to be in a Senate. So I guess my question is, what is the major source of your optimism in getting that many people, incumbents, to pull that trigger to vote yes?
I mean, in short, I've had the good fortune of lobbying these guys. I've actually gone into a lot of both Republican and Democrat legislators, senators, House members, and rank and file. The people that got elected, they got elected because they wanted to serve the people. They had a calling, as a public service. And when I talk to them one-on-one, I've had a really great run with people like Mike Gallagher and Brian Fitzpatrick, Republicans. So you would think these guys aren't going to support this. They totally do. They totally do, because as soon as you win, the first day you get there, you're told by party leadership, you're going to be spending 75% of your time raising money. You're going to be on the phone dialing for dollars. You're going to spend every weekend, not with your family and not with constituents, but you're going to be going to fundraisers where you're trying to gin up money for the super PAC. They don't like this. They don't enjoy this. So every single member of Congress that I've ever talked to, they don't like the system as it is. They want to change it. The people that don't want to change it are obviously the donor class. And then the party elites, the leaders of the party that say, well, it's a nuclear arms race and we can't give up anything to the other side. We're making the case that you have to. We need mutual disarmament. Otherwise, the whole system will break. And so I am optimistic, because how else could I be? And like I said, in the meetings, when I talk to them, they do support this. They just need the political cover to pull the pin on this and say, all right, yeah, I'm going to do this.
Thanks.
That's awesome.
I'm fired up again, Alan. Thank you.
So we'll wrap it up after these last 2 questions, or wrap up this part of the meeting, and then kind of do some of our standard business. But let's go to Chris in South Carolina.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick observation. It seems like you're picking back off the Article 5 Convention of States. There's a lot of folks who think that's a bad idea. The Article 5 Convention of States, the League of Women Voters is out against it, because no one knows what's going to happen. And there's a big push to really rewrite the Constitution beyond just term limits and balanced budget. And if you can get yours piggybacked on there, there's a lot of concern about what's going to actually happen at this convention. Are you concerned about any of that?
I'll let Caitlin answer, but I'm with you. I'm 100%. We're actually not using the Article 5 Constitutional Convention approach. I'll let Caitlin describe what we are using.
Yeah, so we, as Alan mentioned in his presentation, we are taking the approach that has worked for virtually all of the other amendments. We are students of history as well, which is that it will be supported by 2/3 of the members of Congress and ratified by 3/4 of the state. So we are not looking at a convention approach.
And then Daniel, you want to final question around American Promise and campaign finance reform?
Sure, thanks, Eric. I was just going to riff off of what Roger mentioned, to the point of the positivity for change. And I work in show business, and so my attention is the coin of the realm for me. And when you have the attention of folks, and you all agree, let's say there's 50 people in this room, you all agree. Does anybody want big money in politics? No. Well, then the conversation turns into how, and that's the how conversation. Like, well, are we talking politics? Are we talking prudence? And we're going to be talking about prudence. So if people are talking politics, they'll get out of the room. And that's where, folks will just, let's separate the adults from the kids, kind of thing. And show those, we're a group of military folks. I'm going to get the bullshit out the door. Let's get stuff done, and I think that's where we can have a conversation with these elected leaders about getting off their ass. Like, I've led soldiers and done some things. There's real life happening, and their meetings about things can only go so far before they piss people off like me. And I'll walk into their room and eat them up, So, when Roger, to your point, it's just like, how long are you going to tolerate it? That's the question I think that we have to ask ourselves. How long are you going to tolerate it before money starts pumping into our elections that don't have heartbeats?
Yeah.
So anyways, that's it.
Well said, Daniel. And look, I mean, this is part of why I love these meetings. Everyone here, right, is a person of action who wants to be a problem solver, who wants to be part of the real solutions that we don't hear about in the politics industry at all. And so for us to be successful, for American Promise to be successful, for Veterans for All Voters to be successful, it requires, this is all hands on deck, right? The thousands of reform organizations, it requires veterans, it requires grass tops, grass blades, grassroots, all of the above, right? So there's no bad action that anyone on this call can take if it moves this movement forward, whether it's big or small. We're going to be grateful for it. So Caitlin, I don't know. Yeah, take action. Do you have any final thoughts for this?
It's hard to follow that up, frankly, with what Daniel was saying. I so appreciate that, because we know that Americans, they believe that our money and our politics is a threat to our democracy. It is a threat to our democracy, but nothing is going to happen if we don't all work to make this change. And until we pass an amendment to the US Constitution, we're just cutting around the edges, right? You can kind of flit around the edges and make some changes, but nothing's really making a difference. So if you feel that way, and it sounds like some of you do, we would be grateful for your support and help. We will put you to work. We believe in action. I think, as Eric has known me long enough, that if anybody even shows the hint that they might want to help, they will be put to work and will be making a difference, because it will take all of us. And with that, just thank you so much for having us, and grateful for all the work you are all doing around the country.
Thank you. Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, Alan. So I'd like to transition to some of our normal business. Normally, we introduce folks, if this is your first or second call, or you haven't ever joined us or introduced yourself, please raise your hand physically or virtually. I know I saw at least one newer person I was going to highlight. I'm not sure he's in a place where he can talk, but Brian Schroeder is a Coast Guard veteran in Alaska who's joined us. He's the former U.S. attorney for the state of Alaska, and just an outstanding servant leader who's rolling up his sleeves to help protect against the threat of the new Alaska election model being repealed. Our opposition, they have deemed themselves Alaskans for honest elections, even though they're funneling money through a church. This is public knowledge, but it's a real threat. They probably will qualify. The repeal effort will probably qualify and be on the ballot in November. I don't know if Brian, if you're in a place to talk about a little bit about your background and why you joined us, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everybody. Nice to speak to everybody. I'm Brian Schroeder, live here in Anchorage. And let's see, I don't know, like Eric laid it out. I'm a retired Coast Guard captain, was a lawyer, did some work, became a federal prosecutor, was a line federal prosecutor for 12 years here in Alaska, and then was lucky enough to become the U.S. attorney. I don't know, the reason I'm here is it's really great to hear all the excitement in all the different programs that everybody's doing. Ranked choice voting, I think, is, you know, I'm in many ways, I'm a kind of a centrist, but I have an R behind my name, which is why I was asked to be on Alaskans for Better Elections, which is the pro ranked choice voting group here in Alaska, because it's being looked at as a partisan issue, that Republicans for it, Democrats for ranked choice voting, Republicans against, and we're trying to make it clear that it's not, you know, it's not a partisan issue. So the Alaskans for Better Election folks recruited some people with R's behind their name to try to help them make that point clear during this to fight this repeal process. So they asked me to do it, and I was happy to do it, because I think, you know, I like a lot of you, I suspect, I don't think the nomination processes, those party controlled processes were moving candidates into office that represented me, and I want candidates that represent me. So that's what we're all about. That's what we're doing, and I thank Eric for introducing me, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Brian. We're really grateful to have you on the team. I think I saw Tom Alley raising his hand. He's a newer volunteer in Colorado. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. I'm Tom Alley. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, and I'm also a founding member of Ranked Choice Voting for Colorado, and instrumental in getting ranked choice voting passed in Broomfield, Colorado. But I saw this organization recently, and it fits my views very strongly, and so I decided to join. I'm glad to be part of your group.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tom. Yeah, thanks for all the good work you're doing in Colorado, another super important state. And we will move to state updates next. Is there anyone else that wants to say hello? One person I was going to introduce, and I don't know if Chris Kasker, I don't know if you're in a place to talk. If not, that's okay. But Chris is our new task force leader in New York. He's working closely with our in-state partner, Unite New York. And Chris is just starting to build real momentum around, I mentioned Unite New York is focusing on term limits as a first step, but they really believe in Final Five voting is where they want to try to get to long term. So we're grateful for Chris. He's a local elected official who was nominated by both the Republican and the Democratic Party, which can only happen in, I believe, in Connecticut or New York, that have fusion voting where multiple parties can nominate the same candidate, which is another reform that I'm personally supportive of. We don't necessarily champion, but as an organization. All right, anyone else? If not, I'm going to run through my list of states really quick, and then maybe call on folks in some of these key states where we're tracking. You've heard me say this before. And also some really specific calls to action in these places. So mission number one is defend the good work in Alaska. Number one, we cannot let the people who want to repeal the new Alaska system, we cannot let them win. So if you know anyone in Alaska, anyone at all, they don't even have to be a veteran, please send them our way. email introduction or send them the link that Jameson shared earlier. Number 2, Nevada. We passed Final 5 voting in Nevada once. Ballot question 3 passed in 2022. Based on an idiosyncrasy of the Nevada state constitution, we have to pass it again this year in 2024. One of the things we're learning, this is a problem. Your average Nevadan has no idea that you have to pass a ballot initiative twice. A lot of them think, oh, wait a minute, we already have open primaries and top 5 instant runoff voting, and we don't. So Nevada is a hugely important state. Nakia is here and others, I believe. So if you know anyone in Nevada, please send them our way. And then let's see, Idaho. I see a lot of great folks from Idaho on the call. They're making great progress. We'll get an update, maybe from George or someone on the Idaho team on their progress on a ballot amendment toward top 4 instant runoff voting, open primaries. Washington, D.C. I'm going to kick it over here to our Chief of Staff, Alex Littell. Washington, D.C. is underway. They're gathering signatures. They have 10,000 collected. They need 30,000. And there's virtual training that anyone in the DC area, or if you're going to be flying to DC for a weekend and you want to go out and gather signatures, Alex is going to tell us about some virtual training you have to take. You get certified and you can go out and maybe collect signatures with us. We're going to target April 27th, Saturday, April 27th from 1 to 4 p.m. in the DC area. Alex, do you have any other info you want to share?
Yeah, sure. So the DC campaign is, as Eric alluded to, they're doing 2 trainings every week. The days vary, but they're doing 2 trainings every week. As if you're a DC resident and you get through the training, you're able to go collect signatures. During the training, if you're not a DC resident, they'll also tell you how you can get certified to collect signatures in DC, despite not being a resident. It's a pretty simple process. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the link to sign up for trainings into the group chat. So if anyone is interested in doing so, please follow this link and you can sign up for one of the biweekly trainings. And then if neither of the trainings work for you, you can either contact the organizer or you can wait till the following week and they'll publish 2 new trainings. So once you're trained and certified and able to collect signatures, the next step in the process is actually collecting them. They have something called circulation and SIP. I can't remember the exact name, but every Saturday from 1 to 4, groups go into one of the 8 wards in DC and collect signatures. And then afterwards, there's a happy hour, some type of social event. Here's a link. I am now dropping a link in, I dropped the same link. I'm now dropping a separate link into the group chat. This is to the weekly Saturday events. So anyone that may be interested, please check that out. And as Eric alluded to, as a group, we're going to try to collect signatures on April 27th. I myself am getting trained this week, April 4th, if anyone's available. It's over Zoom. But we're going to meet as a group and do something together on April 27th and probably do some type of happy hour after. So if you're interested, please email me and we can, and I'll send out some details. I'm going to put my email in the chat as well. But that is everything. And one final thing. So as Eric alluded to, 10,000 signatures collected already, on path to 30,000. I think the exact need is 5% of registered voters in 5 out of the 8 wards. Somehow that equates to 30,000, but we're on track. We need to keep pushing. So any help would be greatly appreciated. With that, I'll pass back to you, Eric.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so if you know anyone in the DC area who might be willing to gather signatures, it's a huge support to the campaign and it's a win-win. And just to make it clear, this is an active ballot campaign for ranked choice voting in both the primary and the general, and it would be a semi-open primary. So it would be similar to Maine's model. So right now, independent voters, about 70,000 DC residents cannot vote in primaries. This ballot amendment would open up primaries to independent voters. All right, next up, Colorado. I have an update from the Colorado team where every state has a unique process for how you get a citizen's petition on the ballot. I shouldn't say every state, the half of our states that have the citizen's petition process. I've been learning a lot about Colorado. They have this title board, and the team in Colorado has been submitting many different titles, different policies in the hopes of getting one that's really solid and really good. Part of the concern is single subject rule that I mentioned earlier. Some of the titles come back and the title board says it violates single subject. There could be an appeals process. That process is working out right now. We should know by May what the actual policy is that will be an active ballot amendment in Colorado, and we intend to launch Veterans for Colorado Voters as an official task force on May 15th at VFW Post 1, the original VFW post. I see Brandon O'Brien, aka Radar, on the call, and Lisa Ferret, who's running for state rep in Colorado right now. I don't know if either of you wants to share any other updates from Colorado.
No, I would just ask, I think you nailed it there, Eric, that I mean, I think we're all excited to get things like this campaign, so to speak, kicked off once the ballot initiatives are finalized. But if anybody knows of any voters, especially veterans in Colorado, that have not yet connected with us, please, maybe post on your socials. Maybe you've got connections in Colorado that aren't aware of what we're working on, and then connect them with Lisa or Tom or myself or Greg or any of our team here in Colorado.
Yeah, thanks for covering down. I had a screaming child on the floor. So yeah, it's an interesting strategy. Actually, I'm learning a ton with you think the power is in elected people. It's actually in title boards and just getting through that first level is pretty crazy.
Yes, lots of hurdles to get on the ballot. And states like Missouri, where I live, that have the ballot initiative process, our supermajority state legislature just passed a bill that will go to a vote of the people that would make it nearly impossible for us to pass constitutional amendments again in the future. How that is government of, by, and for the people, I have no idea, but that's what they just passed. So that's another threat we need to protect against, is states that have the ballot initiative where the state legislature doesn't like what the people are passing. They're trying to make it harder for us to use that tool. Real quick, I want to talk about Montana. Is a state that there's two states that have really interesting ballot amendments happening this year. Arizona is doing a ballot amendment for open primaries where they will require a majority winner, but they're not saying that it has to be top 2, 4, or 5. They're going to then let the state legislature decide. Montana is doing something similar. They're doing 2 ballot initiatives. One is for open primaries, and one will require a majority winner. And what the state legislature will have to figure out when we pass both of these in 2024 is, how do you get there and not have to spend tons of money on extra in-person runoffs? The hope is they'll realize, oh, wait a minute, there's this tool called instant runoff voting we can use and save money. So Montana's moving forward. They're on track. Todd's going to be in Bozeman in late May doing speaking at the new Montana Fest, and we'll be launching a chapter in Montana. So that's another state where we need more leaders. And then I'll go to Idaho, which for us at Veterans for All Voters, this is the Idaho campaign's kind of the gold standard for, frankly, just kicking ass and taking names. So we love learning from you all, and George and a few other folks from Idaho. I don't know if you have any updates from us or for us.
Thanks for that commercial. I think I'll put it on my resume. I've been out of the state for about 6 weeks. Stan may have more current information than I do. We are doing well. We're getting close. But Stan, do you want to say a little more about that?
Yeah, so at last reckoning, we needed 18 districts to qualify. We had 17 and 4 in the pipeline. And we've probably crossed over the line. We're still gathering more signatures because we need valid signatures, not just a gross number of signatures. So the legislature is still in session and is resisting going home, which is always troublesome. And we're kind of under fire from the Republican Central Committee. They're specifically targeting the ranked choice voting, open primaries, with a big disinformation campaign that we're ramping up to kind of fight against. So
just a quick names and terms things. When Stan says valid signatures, every petition in Idaho only has room for 12 signatures. It has to be attached to the language of the initiative. All of the signatures on that particular petition have to be from the same county. All petitions are screened through the Secretary of State. They will screen out dupes. They will screen out signatures that aren't from the right county. Is this laborious? Yes. We have the second most difficult initiative process anywhere in the country. So in order to get to the 63,000 that we need, the goal is to get to 100,000. to leave room for losses, of which there will be many. But as Stan says, we're confident we're on track. In 6 weeks, we will know.
Awesome. Thank you both. And then here in the closing minutes, if anyone else has a state update or something they want to share for the good of the order, go ahead and then we'll wrap it up here in just a few minutes. Chris, what do you have for us, brother?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm a retired intel officer, so I look at the threat. I don't know if anyone else is tracking, but the Brennan Center just put out a notice that folks are using mass purges of voter rolls to suppress voters. For those of us who have been in the military, may have been registered in multiple states to vote. If you have come up on people's radar screens as being against folks, they will use voters to purge you from their rolls. So just make sure you're still registered to vote, and you haven't been purged. You never know what's happening out there. Keep an eye on your own six.
That's a great public service announcement, Chris. Thank you. Mike Cantwell in Virginia.
Yeah, just real quick, I put it in the chat, but there's a lot of misinformation out there about ranked choice voting, and they usually cite Arlington, Virginia about how it didn't work and everybody hated it and everything like that. That's all disinformation. So just so you know, it was a little bit complicated, but they passed ranked choice voting for primaries, but then they passed ranked choice voting for primaries and the general election for the Arlington County Board. So we are an exemplar of implementing ranked choice voting at the local level. And there's 250,000 people that live in Arlington, so it's pretty significant. So please contact me if you need the details on ranked choice voting in Arlington, Virginia.
Thanks, Mike. And I just dropped in the chat. Please bookmark this. If you haven't ever checked out our volunteer resources, they're fantastic. There's facts to know. There's a messaging document. There's a place where you can grab a signature block and add it to your email. There's our presentation deck. You can make your own copy. If any of you ever are able to get a presentation opportunity to a local chamber or Lions Club, Rotary, I'm happy to hop on a call or Zoom and run through the deck with you and give you feedback. Daniel from Kentucky, what do you have for us, brother?
Hey, I just wanted to ask, what state do we still need to complete Veterans for All voters to be in all 50 states? So if we got some new folks, I want to welcome them, but still to get a veteran in every state.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. The last two holdouts are West Virginia and North Dakota. So for whatever reason, those two states have been really hard to find someone. So if you know any veterans or really anyone at all in either West Virginia or North Dakota, there is actually some really high-level folks in West Virginia we've met with who are going to start working on these reforms behind the scenes. They just don't want to be publicly identified yet. And then Rhode Island's another state where it pains me as a Navy guy, with all the naval presence in Rhode Island. We have one leader, and love to see some more leaders there. And in New Hampshire, we only have one leader right now. So those 4 states would be the needs. Chris Fussell in West Virginia, he's amazing. So all right, so closing it out, thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Henry was one of volunteers almost 3 years ago now, brother. And some of you now, Kevin Miller, Mark in Wisconsin, we've been working on this for a long time. And sometimes the progress feels painfully slow. And sometimes it feels like, what are we even doing? But please know that you are part of something that is going to be studied in history books 50, 60, 70 years from now, when they talk about there was this reform movement where Americans got together and finally updated the political operating system, which hadn't been done in 100 years. And American Promise is part of it. Veterans for All Voters, Unite America, the new book, Primary Solution. If you don't have it, get it. This makes the case so strongly for what we're doing. You are part of making history. So thank you. Thank you for continuing your service. Thank you for honoring your oath by serving our country over any political affiliation. And we are going to change the trajectory for good for our posterity. And I can't thank all of you enough for everything you're doing. Onward.